It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com, or just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Today we have Bob Zeidman from Zeidman Consulting. You can check him out on Twitter at BZWriter on Twitter. You can check. He's got a book coming out called Election Hacks, and it's about his lawsuit. Arbitration settlement with Bob Lindell from MyPillow.com, the fellow who's been trying his darndest to prove some kind of election fraud. Now, Election Hacks is coming out in early November or late October, and there could be an accompanying documentary with it as well. And if you want to meet Bob Zeidman in person, Suncoast Casino, October 26th, he's going to be speaking about ranked choice voting. And this is related to Nevada. They want to bring in ranked choice voting instead of the caucus system that they have over there now. Mr. Bob Zeidman, are you there?
Yeah, Ed, hi. Thanks for having me on the show.
Nah, so far so good, man. It's been great. I really enjoyed talking to you off the air. Before we get into your whole lawsuit, the book Election Hacks, your speaking engagement over there at Suncoast on the 26th, tell us about yourself. Who is Bob Zeidman?
Well, let's see. I grew up in Philadelphia. I went to Cornell University in upstate New York. I then went to Stanford after that. I spent 40 years in Silicon Valley. Really interesting place. I'm an engineer. People think I'm a lawyer because what I do mostly these days is I work on intellectual property litigation, but I do it as an engineer where I'm helping lawyers figure out the technology in patent cases, copyright cases, trade secret cases. But I've learned a lot about intellectual property law, and I wrote a book on it. And I developed the field of software forensics, which is basically analyzing software to see if intellectual property misappropriation or infringement occurred. And that's me in a nutshell, I guess. And I live in Las Vegas. Oh, and I'm a poker player. Everybody's interested in that. I'm surprised how many people are interested in the fact that I play high-stakes poker.
All right, we'll have to have you come back and talk about that. Now, I'm sure you testify in court as an expert witness often.
Yeah, actually, I've done it. I've been involved in over 260 cases.
Okay.
And I've testified, I think, about a dozen times. Most cases settle.
Right.
I've been deposed, I think, around 70 times, and I've testified like a dozen times.
And that's also another reason why people think you're a lawyer, because you do become very familiar with the legal process. And a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, like depositions, like you said, and backroom negotiations and things, you become familiar with. And you tend to speak on that. Now, you've written a bunch of technical books as well that people can find on Zeidman Consulting.com, Zeidman Consulting.com. You want to tell us about these books real quick?
Sure. Actually, if you go to Zeidman.net, you'll find everything that I've done. You'll find a link to all my web pages. So I wrote a book on software forensics. It's all about the process and the tools. One thing that's frustrated me over the years is that I go up as an expert on a case. And I'll tell you also that I have a rule, and the people who hire me know this, and they hire me because of it. The rule is I don't prejudge anyone. I know experts who won't work for some kinds of companies, for example. I don't prejudge any party. I work for them, and I tell them the truth, which means after the analysis is done, it may not support their case. And I let them know that. But also, as an expert, I need to know how to present the facts because they can be misinterpreted. So, there's certain things you don't want to mention, but they may come up. There's certain things you want to discuss in a certain way. Certain terms can influence people, so you don't want to use them. But ultimately, it's got to be the truth. I won't say anything that's not true. And so it's all written in my book, The Software IP Detective's Handbook. I also, over the years, I became an expert on programmable integrated circuits and things like that. So probably nothing that your audience would be interested in. But I've also written a few novels.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Those are, 4 novels. One's a young adult novel. So that's called The Amazing Adventure of Edward and Dr. Sprechmachen. It was a story I told my son on a very long trip, and then I decided to write it up. There's Horror Flick, which won me an Opus Magnum Award from the Hollywood Film Festival.
Yeah.
And I thought it's about a movie that's so bad that people die watching it. And, I went to Hollywood and I was told that, hey, this is the first step in my big Hollywood writing career. And, all the producers who said they really were interested in great writers wouldn't return my phone calls. So I went back to engineering. And then I wrote Good Intentions and Animal Lab, which are political satires.
So the best place to go is Zeidman.net, Zeidman.net. That's where we can find all of our friends. A real renaissance man here in every area. Poker player, I think you were saying that off the air, not even on the air. Poker player too as well. Let's see. Bob Lindell. How did you hear about this?
Mike Lindell.
Mike Lindell. That's right. Yeah, Mike Lindell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mike Lindell. My Pillow. And by the way, if you go to mypillow.com and you put in promo code Lumpy Pillows, you can really
say that
I know.
In the deposition where he gets upset about that.
Oh, that was the best one, man. I got all that on the Patreon, at the Opera Report Patreon. Mike Lindell flipping out at this deposition. And you've sat through depositions. Have you seen anything like that before?
Well, no. Let's see. I've seen a few crazy depositions. I mean, the craziest one I was in was I was working on a case with a lawyer, and technically the case is still going on. It's been on hold for 4 years. And he really didn't have experience with an intellectual property case. And I was being deposed, and he started yelling and cursing, something I won't do on your show. Yeah. But he started cursing the other lawyers. There were like 4 different parties, and they all defendants, and they all sent a lawyer. And then one of the lawyers he knew, and they started cursing back and forth and just shouting at each other. And I just kept thinking, I know how to answer this question, but my lawyer was saying, and again, I won't repeat it, but he was saying, you're asking him questions you shouldn't be asking. And the other guy's saying, I can ask whatever I want. And the other lawyers are, saying, can we please get back to the deposition? And I'm just sitting there thinking, I can answer the question. You don't have to yell at the guy. You don't have to curse at the guy. But other than that, and there is a deposition online, by the way, a famous deposition where the lawyers, one of the lawyers from Texas, he offers, and he's like in his 70s, he offers to beat up the other lawyer. I'm gonna punch you, and also starts cursing, which I won't do, but it's pretty funny. But so this is like the third. Lindell's is like maybe the third interesting deposition I've seen.
Yeah. Usually the lawyers can save the punching threats for the elevator on the way home, But,
well, one thing that, and you're probably familiar with this, one thing I like, and I write about this in my book, it's hard to be angry at people at a deposition. When the recording is off, everybody's friendly. Where are you going to lunch? Okay, how about if we take a break? Yeah. Anybody, which way to the bathroom? Hey, did you see that game on TV? Where are you staying in town? I mean, everybody's usually really friendly. I've had like a handful of depositions where the lawyers were just nasty to me all the time, even at the break. But you don't see that.
Even in criminal cases, yeah. It's just amazing. It's when the cameras and the recordings are on, it's different. And even when you're doing a radio show, it's different when they're off. You're just a lot more human when we're off. But Mike Lindell, let's get into this whole situation. How did you hear? Mike Lindell issued a challenge, and then Bob Zeidman heard about it. What's going on? Well,
so I must have been some podcasts or some conservative podcasts where he advertises. And I'm a conservative. I've outed myself as a Republican. I was listening to them, and of course I saw all his annoying commercials, but I do have his pillow. My wife loves it, and I have pairs of slippers actually from his company, and I really like them. So I saw that he was announcing this prize, but I didn't think much of it because I thought, well, if he's announcing a prize, he has the proof. And it'll be really interesting to find out what it is, but it'll be in all the papers, and I don't need to spend time in South Dakota where the conference was examining data, because even, it's possible that the data does not prove voter fraud like he claims it does, but it probably shows something, and it would take months of work to figure out what it does show. So I thought, well, I'll just stay home. But then friends of mine started calling me up and saying, Bob, you got to go to this conference. You're the world's leading expert. And, at first I said, look, I'm not going to. And they said you could win $5 million. Mm. And I kept saying, I'm not going to win $5 million. Either the data's correct or it's going to take months to disprove it. But then finally, my friends started saying, it's going to be historic. And I thought, that's true. Whatever happens, it'll be historic. Why not go and just be there when he announces it? Either the election will be overturned or somebody will figure out that the data is not right eventually. Something will happen. So I'll be there and I'll meet a lot of interesting people. So that's what convinced me to go.
So specifically, what was Lindell claiming?
So it's kind of interesting because if you look at his claims over time, he claimed that different entities had hacked into the vote
right.
In the 2020 election and had changed the vote from from Trump to Biden. So a lot of votes that were supposed to go to Trump were switched to go to Biden. Now, over time, there were rumors about the Democrats did it, the deep state did it, the Russians did it. Eventually, he settled on the Chinese did it. So that was what he was saying. The Chinese hacked into our system, and he had the proof.
Yeah, at one point they were saying there was a gunfight, a firefight in Germany with CIA agents, and there was even a former five-star general that was McEnany, I think it was, that was up there confirming all this. It's just so bizarre.
Yeah, I remember. Well, what I remember is somebody said that the data was being shipped to Germany. That's the only part I remember. Oh. Somebody had said that the voting machine data was shipped to Germany, where it was sent somewhere else, and somebody was hacking into it. There was
satellites involved. Yeah, Now, is the name Patrick Bergy familiar to you?
What's the last name?
Bergy, Bergy.
It sounds familiar, but I'm not sure.
Because he actually did the same thing. He analyzed all this data for them, for Sidney Powell and for, I believe Lindell, but definitely for Sidney Powell and that bunch, and Mike Byrne and that whole crew. And he told them, man, there's nothing here. And he even examined Hunter Biden's laptop, too, as well. He was friends with all these guys. He was on their side. He still is, like yourself, a Trump supporter, and has come out just to say that this is just so bizarre, these claims they're making. So Lindell was claiming that he had data that proved the Chinese were involved?
Yeah, so also let me clarify. I'm not. So when I did all this, I have some friends who are really big Trump supporters, and among the biggest in the country, and I thought they wouldn't talk to me.
Yeah.
But they're both still good friends of mine, and they understand what I did, and it's part of finding the truth. And I'm not a big Trump supporter anymore. I was never a big Trump supporter, and it's very complicated. I don't want to go into it. I did vote for him twice, but I'm probably not going to be voting for him this time. Unfortunately, the Democrats really just don't give me much choice. I wish the Democrats would do a better job of putting up a decent candidate. But that's a separate issue. A lot of the people who worked for Lindell were involved in the cases with Sidney Powell and all of those, which is unfortunate because they really don't know what they're doing. With the exception of a guy, I'll mention him by name, Josh Merritt. I've been in communication with him. He was a whistleblower. He was hired by Lindell. He worked with Sidney. He at least met Sidney Powell. He was working on some of those cases, and he kept telling him the data's bogus.
Yeah.
And Lindell not only fired him, but did a 2-hour video claiming this guy was a traitor to our country. And because Josh worked for conservative organizations, nobody will hire him anymore. So really sad.
It really is. And by the way, I think people can see your professionalism by now. They've heard you for a good 20 minutes now when I'm not interrupting. So I think people can see your professionalism and you're above partisan politics as far as your analysis. And I got to put your reputation on the line for this, just for some nonsense. So you were able to examine this data, and what did you conclude?
Well, so here's the interesting thing. To me, there's a lot of interesting things, but at the symposium, despite what Lindell says, every single expert there. Oh, by the way, let me add, So we were sequestered in a room. I mean, I shouldn't put it that way. We were allowed into a room with the data to examine it if we were qualified. There really wasn't a qualification process. But in that room were some very high-powered people, some of whom I had heard of, some of whom seemed to have great experience, and some of whom, but there were also people who were just IT people who were very honest. They were IT people and they wanted to be there and help out if they could. And every single person in that room examining the data, all the so-called cyber experts, agreed the data didn't have anything to do with the election. But the advantage that I had, for whatever reason, karma, luck, I don't know, I happened to see what it really was. And that's when I wrote my report and entered the challenge. But what it really was nonsense. It was, many of the documents were simple Word documents with random letters in them. But then they had gone through this transformation, which I describe in the book, this transformation to make it look like complicated data. And I just happened to stumble on it. I said, I think this looks like this. And so if I reverse this transformation, and I've been doing this for 50 years, so I had tools already that I had written, software tools I'd written over the past decades. And I just said, let me see, I think I've got a tool that will change this to this. And once I did it, out popped a Word document of random characters. Yeah. So the big reason there were two reasons why I won the challenge, and other people didn't. The first reason was I initially, again, through luck or experience or whatever you want to call it, serendipity, I happened to see, everyone agreed the data was bogus, but no one knew what it was. I happened to see what it was. I happened to recognize it and undo the transformations. And then because I've been involved in so many court cases, I just went back to my hotel room and wrote up a report, whereas other people were still scratching their heads and saying, what is this?
What do you conclude then? Was Lindell duped?
That was a big question. By the end of the conference, again, Lindell, claims that all the cyber experts agree to his valid data, and it's just completely nonsense, completely not true. We were all saying, the phrase was Lindell bamboozled or was he the bamboozler?
Yeah.
And, it was hard to know, but I think after I've gone through this, year-long arbitration and another 6 months of him appealing and still fighting with him, I think he was conned he was given data. He bought the data for between $1.5 and $3 million from Dennis Montgomery, who has a long history of fraud, or at least of being accused of fraud, and being in court. And but Lindell wants to believe it so badly that he refuses to listen to anyone who tells him that it's wrong. So I think what's happening is he wants to believe it so badly that he's forced himself to believe it, even though it's obviously bogus data sold to him by someone with a history of selling bogus data.
Right. Yeah, I didn't realize it was Dennis Montgomery. Now, who does have a reputation. Let's just say that. Now, before, at the beginning of the contest, I guess it was a contest or a challenge, did you meet with Lindell? Did you get along with him? What was that like before it became adversarial?
Well, I never met with him until the actual arbitration, but even then I didn't really meet with him, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. At the conference, the first day, first of all, during arbitration, there's discovery where they turn over materials that we ask for. And we asked for materials from the conference, and lo and behold, he gave me an agenda that showed speakers and time slots, and I can tell you there was no agenda. When everybody got there, we were handed a blank agenda that said something like speakers starting at 9, lunch at noon, more speakers at 1, ending at 5. So we didn't know who to expect. And the first day, it was just Lindell talking nonstop the entire time.
Wow.
Yeah, he and whenever he got too hoarse or tired, he'd lead a rendition of either the Pledge of Allegiance or God Bless America, and everybody would stand. And but it was just him ranting about China and elections and hacking. But I did get to kind of meet him at the arbitration. And what's interesting is that he's just an obsessive personality.
Yeah.
So he came into the deposition and into the hearing on his phone. He would get off his phone to give his testimony. At the deposition, he actually took a phone call during his deposition. And then he'd leave and get back on the phone, I think making business calls or some kind of calls. But what was interesting is that he kept referring to me. I was sitting there, and he kept referring to me as that guy, that alleged cyber guy who's suing me. And he didn't even know that I was sitting across the table from him. He's just really oblivious to what's going on.
Yeah, it does seem like he runs the entire MyPillow empire on his cell phone, that he runs the whole business through his phone. And in those depositions that I keep talking about, then there's like a good 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours of several days, there's clips of like 4 or 5 days of depositions. There's just the funny parts, really, that I have up on my Patreon. I found out that he took a break from the deposition, went like on Fox News or something with a pillow in his hand, like in the next room. He did a live video, segment with holding a pillow in it, and came back into the deposition a little while later. Just when you think about how this guy made his way into the White House and sat down with the president with a folder talking about martial law.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Yeah, you're right. It's. I don't know. I think you and I are around the same age. As I've gotten older, I used to think that the more influence you had, the more whether you ran a company or right. Were a politician, that you were smarter, more organized. And then I meet these people, and I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on all over the world. I've worked on cases, patent cases, trade secret cases for some of the biggest companies in the world. And you find out some of the stuff they're doing internally, and you realize, what are these people thinking? But that happens. So I think politicians, business people, they're just not as necessarily as smart as I used to think they are.
It's so true. And now with social media, we do have more contact. They make themselves more available. The mystique, the curtain has been lifted.
Yeah, exactly.
How about Ron Watkins, Code Monkey? Was he present at this contest?
That's a good question, because he was there remotely. So he was on a big screen. Lindell and some people brought him in. But I've got to give him credit. I don't know much about him. I knew I'd heard of him, I think, but I didn't know much about him. I know a little more about him now. At the conference, he was, I think, in Switzerland or something. So he was remote. And the people on the stage were trying to get him to say, look, we've got this data here. And you can tell, allegedly they had some disk from a voting machine.
Right.
And they were saying, look at this voting machine. It's missing a file here. That's proof that somebody hacked it. And to his credit, he would say, well, there could be reasons. It's something that should be investigated. But, without knowing anything further, I can't say it's hacking, but it's something that we should look into. And then the people on the podium would say, see, even Code Monkey, what is it, Code Monkey X?
Code Monkey. Code Monkey, wait, it's in front of me here someplace. Code Monkey Z, I think it is.
Code Monkey Z, okay. Yeah. They say, even Code Monkey Z agrees it was hacked, but that's not what he said. He said, and this is what I've always said too. I've been involved in a lot of cases where people will say, look, this is a sign that something was stolen. And I have to say, no, it's a sign that we need to investigate further. But you can't just jump to that conclusion. So I kind of respected him. He was one of the few people at the conference on the stage who was reluctant to draw any conclusion based on just looking at something on a computer screen.
Yeah, for the audience, Code Monkey is Ron Watkins, I apologize, who's the son of Jim Watkins. There is no Ken. I'm just as bad as calling Mike Lindell Bob. Okay? The names aren't my thing. Okay. But his father is Jim Watkins. It's Ron Watkins. And they're the guys from the Philippines, the pig farmer that were involved in 4chan. People suspect they're involved with QAnon at a high level. We found out one of our frequent guests on here was employed by these characters. There were bizarre stuff going on there. So for the audience, that's what's going on there. And this is intrigue upon intrigue going on in this situation here.
Also one thing just along those lines.
Yeah.
So again, Ron Watkins, Code Monkey Z, from the little I saw of him, I give him some credit for being reasonable. But some of the other people involved in the case, especially during the arbitration, they would, during their depositions and the hearing, they would describe themselves as being spies. They compare themselves to Tom Cruise, and it's ridiculous. These people don't look or act like Tom Cruise. They don't jump off of cliffs. They're IT people. But I think for them, being involved in this giant scandal is exciting.
Right.
And they just want to keep that going. Look, I think that's human nature, but we have to all fight against our own human nature. It's, somebody tells you you're going to be a really important person and speak on Fox News and you're going to visit the White House. It's really tempting to say what will continue to keep you in the public eye. But it's hard to break that and say, look, this stuff isn't true. And the people who are surrounding Lindell are the people who just really love that attention.
Yeah, that's so true too. Now, you said that they did have a legitimate, or that you believe is a legitimate disk from a voting machine. Could that be the Coffee County breach?
Is that the one that was Tina? I can't think of her name. They got in trouble. There was a woman there who's Lindell is paying for her defense. Tina Peters.
Oh, that's interesting. That's possible. Yeah, I think she went on the lam too for a while.
She did.
Right.
And she allegedly brought a disk. Here's the thing about that. Without going into detail, they supposedly brought that disk to the conference, the data from it, and handed it out. It's very confusing, but the problem is there's no what's called a chain of custody.
Right.
There's no chain of custody, and some of the data was missing. I mean, you could just look at it and tell. It's like if you have files 1, 2, 3, and 7, you know that some files are missing, and that's literally what the disk was like. So the problem is if files are missing and you don't have a chain of custody, which means chain of custody is a record of who handled the data, you really can't draw any conclusions from it because you can't verify that it's really from a voting machine. And one of the problems we've got is Lindell is working with people who, I don't know if I want to say stole took an unauthorized image of a voting machine disk, which I understand is not allowed, if not illegal. I don't know if it's illegal, but it wasn't allowed. And the person who took it was not a reputable person. And basing conclusions on this is just wrong. If there's going to be an investigation of voting machines, Mike Lindell is screwing it up because he's doing all this bad stuff. So now nobody, the courts won't allow inspections of voting machines because they've already allowed Mike Lindell to make his case, and it's been bogus. It's been bogus cases all over the country.
That's a good question now because we've had Daniel Hopsicker on the show, sadly just passed away, and he did a lot of investigative reporting on discrepancies, anomalies with voting machines. Do you think it's the potential is there for manipulation with these machines?
So I've written an article, and it's in my book, the second to last chapter of my book. No, I think it's extremely unlikely that the voting machines were hacked or they were purposely manipulated. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of examples. I give one example in my book. That can be found. I mean, there are people like me who investigate technology and will eventually find any kind of hacking. Whereas it's so much easier. It's so much easier to just put in, to write up hundreds or thousands of fake ballots. I'm not saying that happened, but if you have to choose about hacking an election or, changing an election, doing it electronically will leave a trail, and electronic detectives, sleuths like me, will find them eventually. But if you write in fake ballots, it's so hard to find. I mean, there's other kinds of checks against it, but it's just that's easier to do than hacking into electronics or purposely changing the electronics. There are these lawsuits. Lindell is being sued by Smartmatic and Dominion voting systems because he said that they purposely changed. They either allow the hacking or they purposely change their machines. Nobody's going to purposely change a machine because the company will go out of business, the executives will go to jail, and somebody like me will find it.
Right, and when all you really have to do is, hey, this machine is broke, we're not sending it to the black neighborhoods. We're not sending it to the Republican rich neighborhood. We're not sending it there because there's not enough machines. Oh, my goodness, the line is around the block and people leave. But that's how it's done for the last 100 years.
And,
you know?
Everybody always asks me, do you think there was fraud in the election? And I can say, I know there was fraud in the election because every human endeavor has fraud. But how much fraud, I don't know. Was it enough to change the vote? I have no idea.
Yeah. What do you make of Sidney Powell's theory? By the way, have you been brought in as an expert or been asked to testify or interviewed as for these Smartmatic and Dominion lawsuits?
Yeah, I think I can say I don't want to give details because I don't know what's allowed, but I've been brought in as a fact witness, which means I describe the facts of my arbitration with Lindell and what did I learn during that arbitration. So not as an expert witness talking about the technology or hacking, but rather as a fact witness, about what happened at my arbitration. So I've been brought into those lawsuits with regard to that. I don't know Sidney Powell. I understand from people who've worked, I know personally at least one person who worked with her years ago.
Yeah, me too.
Who said she was a brilliant lawyer, but I don't know. And I had a lot of respect for Rudy Giuliani too.
Yeah, me too. I'm from New York. We worked on those cases, those defense cases that Giuliani was prosecuting.
Wow. So, everybody I talked to who knew them says we don't know what happened. I mean, Sidney Powell. Look, I understand you're a lawyer. You defend people. Even if you think they're guilty, you defend them. But you don't put your own reputation at stake. You don't start making provably false statements. And that's what, unfortunately, it seems like Giuliani and Powell have done and destroyed reputations that were stellar up until that point.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, the suit against Mike Lindell is a defamation suit, right?
From
Dominion and Smartmatic, yeah.
Dominion, yeah, exactly.
So then his motives, his intentions, his knowledge would be a factor in this, but do you think he believes what he's saying?
Well, that's interesting. And so I've been researching defamation a lot lately. And, I think, let me say this. I was asked at the Smartmatic case, I was asked, do you think Mike Lindell believes what he's saying?
Yeah.
And I said, I think he does believe it, but I don't know how any reasonable person can believe that given the facts. So I don't know how that plays out in a defamation suit, but I think he does seem to believe it, but I don't know how he can.
And he's devoted his life to this at this point.
Yeah, if you read his book, which I did, his autobiography, I wanted to know who he was, so I read his autobiography, and it's really interesting. He has an addictive personality. He was originally addicted to alcohol, then cocaine, then crack cocaine, and gambling. And then he was able to cut all that out of his life, but I think he needed something to fill the gap. And it became Christianity. He became a devout Christian, which he wasn't before. But he also believes that he got a message from God that Trump needs to be president. And I think he believes that with all his heart and soul. So whatever he does to fulfill God's wishes is legitimate. And I think that's where he's coming from.
So your arbitration has been settled.
Well, it's, the arbitrators ruled in my favor. I can tell you that Lindell has some videos he's posted and given some interviews. It's really fascinating to hear him talk about me. Sometimes he gets my name right. You did a much better job than...
I'm sorry. That was off the air. The audience didn't know until you just told them.
No, but everybody pronounces... There's a 50 chance of getting my last name wrong, but he doesn't even He doesn't even get it close. I mean, he gets something completely different.
Okay.
You'd think he'd know who was suing him. He says that the rules were unfair, but he was the one who wrote the rules that I had to sign. He doesn't mention that part. And then he thinks the arbitrators were biased. What he doesn't mention is that he himself chose 2 of the 3 arbitrators, and it was a unanimous decision. So he's appealing and saying that the ruling, the arbitration decision in my favor was unfair, but he really can't he has no basis for that. It's binding arbitration. There's nothing he can do unless he can show that there was some kind of corruption, like they got together and said, we hate those pillows, so we're going to rule against him.
But where they all rubbing their necks when they came into the vote to rule on the case.
Yeah. So, he really has no basis. So he's appealing the decision, but he's trying to get it overturned, but there's really no basis. That's just a delay. I don't know if he knows it's a delaying tactic. I don't know if his lawyers have told him it's not going to work, because it won't.
It's scary that he's running out of money. Is money in escrow?
Yeah, I know. The thing is, I've told people I don't think I'm going to get paid. I think he's going to run out of money before the courts finally conclude that he has to pay me. But we'll see.
We're talking to Bob Zeidman. Bob Zeidman Consulting, Zeidman. Check out Zeidman.net. On Twitter, it's BZWriter on Twitter. You can meet him in person at the Suncoast, October 26th. He's going to be speaking about ranked choice voting in Nevada. The book is Election Hacks. Now, when you were deciding whether or not, like what happened, you won you proved it, and you got a letter or something saying, hey, we're not paying you, we don't think you really proved it, and what was that? And then you decided to sue? How did that go?
Yeah, so first of all, they kept giving us more and more data every day of the symposium. The first day they gave us data, I proved it was not related to the election. I wrote up a report, and then I came in the next morning, and it turns out they gave us more data, and then that afternoon they gave more data. And but by the end, the third day, that was the deadline. The third day of the symposium was the deadline for submitting a report. I had a second eureka moment where I realized how I could show that all the data was not related. And then I finished up my report. I handed it in. So that was like at 6:00 in the evening. And the rules that Lindell wrote, that he forced all the cyber experts to sign, said that they would make a decision on the winner if there was one by 8:00. And I thought, how do you decide in 2 hours? Right. It's even more ridiculous when at the arbitration it came out that the panel of judges who were going to decide whether I won the contest were one IT person, one physicist, and one lawyer. Oh. I mean, the lawyer kept admitting, it's Kurt Olson, he kept admitting that he knew nothing about technology. So we asked him, why were you a judge of Mr. Zeidman's report if you know nothing about technology? He said, well, I was there to make sure the rules were enforced. Well, there were no rules, and anyway, that's not what a judge does. But the point was that I never heard from them. I filed a copyright registration. I filed online because I just thought they would lose my report. But then they wouldn't get back to me. So then I found some lawyers who were willing to go to court and basically sent them a letter and said, we think Mr. Zeidman won this contest, or Mr. Zeidman believes he won this contest, and you haven't paid him. And then it was only after we filed for the arbitration, which was required in Lindell's rules. Arbitration was required by him.
Right.
We filed the arbitration, and all of a sudden they sent us a letter detailing why I had not won the won the contest, and what was wrong with my report. But it even came out that the evaluation of my report was done in October, within days after me filing the arbitration, as opposed to back in August when they were supposed to have done it at the symposium.
Gotcha. So they didn't even backdate it.
Look, so many crazy things happened. Again, it'll all be in my book, and I'm thinking, wow, I can't believe this. But look, if you're you and I know backdating, you're not supposed to do that, right? But People do it. I see it all the time in court. And then if you figure that out, people will say, oh, well, we had it on our computer, but we never sent it or something. I mean, whether that's true or not is questionable, but at least people do that. And I'm not saying they should, but people do. But this was dated.
Oh.
Everything was dated October. And that, at the arbitration, we said, well, you said you evaluated in August. Well, we did. Well, but why is this dated October? Well, we never got around to actually putting the date on it until October. I mean, stupid stuff like that.
Yeah, amateurs. Yeah. And now, did they have an expert on their side? Did he bother to hire an expert?
They did. And one of the mistakes they made, I'm sometimes reluctant to talk about the mistakes until everything's over. But they hired a guy who was a participant in the symposium, who sat next to me at the symposium and who I discussed how the data was bogus at the symposium. And again, I write about this in my book. You don't hire someone who's already involved in the situation because then they can't be unbiased.
Yeah, a contestant. He's a mutual contestant.
Yeah. Right. He was allegedly trying to win the $5 million too, and he did. So of course he's got an axe to grind. Now it's not that simple. I mean, I had respect for the guy they hired, but I thought to myself, why would you hire someone who was involved in it? Why didn't you get someone who's not involved? Because the other thing is, if you get a truly independent expert, the expert can say, well, Mr. Zeidman didn't do test A, B, and C, and I would always do test A, B, and C. And therefore, Mr. Zeidman didn't fulfill the requirements. He didn't examine everything possible. But since they hired a guy named Doug Gould, since Mr. Gould was at the symposium with me and we discussed our findings at the symposium, he can't say, I would have done test A, B, and C, because then our question is, well, did you do test A, B, and C? And if so, where's the results from test A, B, and C? Right? But if you get an independent, it's unfortunate in some cases because I've seen experts who will say anything to support their client.
Sure.
But the fact is they can always say, I would do test A, B, and C. Everybody does test A, B, and C, and Mr. Zeidman didn't do it. But again, since he was at the symposium, the simple question is, did you do what you say Mr. Zeidman didn't do? So that was, I think, a real flaw in their strategy.
Let me ask you this. I'm going to talk real slow so you can get a glass of water. It's an old radio trick. Now, we're discussing the creation of the report shortly before the trial date, the night before the trial, to be, rough. But wasn't there an issue, too, with the creation of the data you were examining, that you also discovered that it was created shortly before the contest and it could not have come from the date of the election?
Right. So they gave us so much. They gave us a bunch of files on day one, and I showed that there was this gibberish and some other stuff that was not related to the election, that was disguised to look like it was something else. On day two in the morning, they gave us more data, and I just ran the same tests. It was the same kind of data. But then in the afternoon, they gave us 509 files, gigabytes worth of data. It was late on day two, and I thought, okay, there's no way I can analyze all this stuff. But that's when I got this second eureka moment on day three. Very late in day three, I looked and all this stuff, all these files were modified within days before the symposium. So that's what I quickly put into my report and then submitted it. And I won't go into the details now because I know we're running out of time. And anyway, it'll be in my book. But it turns out that those 509 files, which I was really worried about, ended up not being an issue at all. And it was because of a mistake that Lindell's legal team made, a serious mistake. I mean, yeah, I don't want to go into detail because I think we're running out of time.
No, we're doing okay. We got about a good, let me see here, we got about a good 7 or 8 minutes.
Well, it's also just hard to explain. But
I got you. But I was just thinking, the book we're talking about is called Election Hacks. And do you want to know what? If people interview, if they have like a YouTube channel and they interview and put election hacks in the title, it's going to get removed from YouTube. You're not allowed to discuss that kind of question the election results. They'll remove it.
Well, that's unfortunate. I hope that doesn't happen. I mean, I'm worried about that because, well, that's the whole question of I've spoken out about free speech. I've written articles about it. I think I've been shadow banned on Facebook. I have a conservative site page on Facebook that used to get a lot of views and doesn't get any anymore. Recently, I wrote a review on Amazon. Amazon tells me that my reviews are really, really popular. I get these emails saying thousands of people have appreciated my reviews of all kinds of products, from, MyPillow. I don't know, maybe I've done MyPillow, but I order sometimes like special screws off of Amazon because I've got some thing at my house that I need a special screw for, and then I'll get this thing saying, "What did you think of this screw?" And I think, it's a screw. What? How can I rate it 1 to 5? It's a screw. But sometimes I'll rate these things and they say, thousands of people, books and things like that. And lately I've had a book review that Amazon just has threatened me.
Wow.
Said they will ban me if I try to post this review again. And it's a book I don't like. I don't use a single obscenity. I don't call out anyone by name. I have no idea why they won't allow me to post it.
Interesting. Are you comfortable telling us the name of the book? I hope it's not my book, but what's the name of the book?
Howard Zinn's People's History of
Really?
United States. Do you know that book?
I'm a fan of Howard Zinn. Yeah, I'm a fan of Howard Zinn. So, but that's okay.
So I'm not.
Yeah.
And but the thing is, they won't let me post my 1-star review of it. So
that's a shame. Yeah, that's a shame. Yeah. It's interesting too, because we're both from Vegas, and it's sort of like a friendly wager. You know what I mean? He puts a contest out, and you went down there and worked for 3 days. I can imagine, that 3 days of work from an expert, expert testimony, deposition. That's time. That's real time and money. You know what I mean? Yeah. That you put out of your pocket. And then I guess the lawyers took it on a contingency, or you had to put up money for that?
No, the lawyers did it on contingency. I can tell you, it's interesting. The lawyers were great.
Okay.
Bailey and Glasser is the firm. It's a medium-sized firm. And Brian Glasser was the partner. He's, from what I understand, he's a Democrat. Bailey, I forget his first name. Bailey is a Republican. And these guys just like taking on authority, taking on big companies, taking on politicians. And a lot of lawyers that I talked to about the case, I needed to do it on contingency. I knew it was going to get expensive. And most of them said, we'd love to do this, but we can't take it on contingency. And Brian Glasser, to his credit, he's the kind of guy who just gets excited. I think he's made a lot of money through his law firm. And this was one of the very smallest cases financially that his firm would work on. I mean, it might even be below the threshold of what they normally work on, at least on contingency. But he did it on contingency because he wanted to see it through. And it's sometimes hard to find people who are willing to make that kind of sacrifice. But to him, it was exciting. To me, it was exciting. At one point, at a couple of points, we talked about a settlement. And basically, Brian said to me, do you want to settle? I think at one point he said, I forgot to ask, do you want to settle? Because we can go in. During the arbitration, he said, we could go in and just say, look, here's a number, tell us this, and we'll settle. And I said to him, it's more than about the money. I certainly want the money, but more importantly, I want to bring this to the public. This is a really important issue. And he said, good, that's the way I feel. And the other thing I said to him is, I said, look, you're a partner in this with me because you're putting out a lot of money in terms of lawyer time, billable hours. I said, if you want to settle, tell me, because you're a partner and I don't want to, if you think we need to settle and you need to recoup your expenses, let's figure it out. And he said, no, I'm good. This is no problem. So it's a great relationship. Not a lot of lawyers will do that. I have a lot of respect for lawyers, but, it's hard. Most won't do. There's very few things they'll take on contingency unless they're potentially worth $100 million.
Which is why in Nevada, but you can't really sue a doctor over there because there's a cap, and you have to pay an expert the same amount as you're settling for. It's just outrageous. Yeah, but real quick, I only got a couple minutes now, and this is a hugely important issue. We need to have faith in our electoral system, as corrupt as it is. Okay, we can live with that. We're both from Vegas again, right? We can live with that. But now, what about, real quick, because there's a lot of characters out there. There's some pretty serious, dangerous characters around this whole bunch. There's Russians. There's even Americans. You hear the stories about they're being hired to kidnap guys from Turkey and put a bag over their head and bring them to Turkey and stuff. Have you been subject to any kind of intelligence operatives or threats or any kind of thing like that?
No, I'm fortunate. I think about it because so not just this, but a lot of expert witnesses, their philosophy is they don't write anything down. They don't like to have something that somebody can go back at and bring up in court and say, it looks, you wrote this article that says whatever. And I've never been like that because I give the honest truth in court, and I don't have to disguise anything or be ashamed of anything I write. But I understand people are worried about that. And I write political articles. My last two novels are political satires, and I worry about it. But actually, I've never had any bad repercussions. And I can tell you that I've gotten the vast majority of people, all sides of the political spectrum, both parties, support what I've done with Lindell and exposing these myths, this bogus data. I have gotten a few hate emails that are kind of nasty, no death threats, but nasty about I'm a terrible person, and they come equally from the left and the right. On the right, I get people saying, "How dare you, go against Trump and help this country will fall apart if he doesn't get back into the presidency, which was stolen from him." And on the left, I don't care what you did, you voted for Trump, which means you are an evil person who is helping destroy this country. So, but it feels good. My wife, always tells me, if everybody loves what you do, you're not doing anything important.
Yeah, it feels great to be hated by everybody. That's okay.
I don't want to be hated by everybody, but
I don't want to be hated by anybody, man. I'm trying to get along with people. Just give me another 10 years, I'll be happy. We've been talking to Bob Zeidman. The book is Election Hacks. It comes out in early November or late October, so the ink's not even dry in this book. We're just waiting for the lawsuit to end. Bob Zeidman, you can find him at Zeidman Consulting or Zeidman.net. You can find him on Twitter, BZ Writer. He's written several books, many books I didn't even know about. And you can meet him in person. You can listen to his presentation there at the Suncoast Casino. It's down way south of the Strip. It's not no traffic down there or nothing. October 26th, and it's about ranked choice voting in Nevada. Mr. Zeidman, thank you so much, my friend.
Ed, thank you very much for having me. I really had a good time.
Yeah, right. I wasn't expecting so much fun, but thank you so much.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye-bye.